Studio. We welcome now Mississippi's Secretary of State, Michael Watson. Mr. Secretary, good to see you, sir.
Always a pleasure, Gerard. Thanks for having me on.
All right, voting day across the Magnolia State. And the reports I'm getting, Mr. Secretary, is that turnout is rather light. What are you hearing?
That's exactly right. I've been in precincts down in Jackson County and stopped in Collins, about to go to some in Jackson here, and we'll be up in Starkville and then later South Haven tonight. And everything we've seen so far has been really light turnout. We only had roughly 19,000 or so absentee ballots that have come in, with a couple of thousand now that may come in by mail, but still that's a pretty low number, which usually indicates a low turnout on today.
Yeah, and we could sit here and I guess dream up all sorts of reasons for that, but maybe chief of that, those list of reasons is that we don't have a truly contentious presidential race. I think if you think
That's right.
about it at this point.
That's true. And some folks have asked, when you go in today, you're probably going to see 4 names on your ballot. And unfortunately, those folks did not send in their withdrawal papers early enough to get that done. Obviously, we have to print ballots, and to make sure we have the timeline and the space to do that, we give them a deadline by when they have to turn in their paperwork to withdraw from the race. So those other 3 did not, and you will see all 4 names on the ballot today, but only President Trump, our former President Trump, is the only active candidate that would be on the presidential primary in the Republican race.
All right, remind the voters, Mr. Secretary, the tools available to them on the Secretary of State's website to find out about what their ballot looks like, where they go to vote, et cetera.
Yeah, so y'allvote.ms is a site that has been very helpful. We started a new tool on there. It's called My Election Day. So if you go in and put your address in, it's going to populate a sample ballot. It's going to populate all of your locally elected officials, the contact information is for your circuit clerk. If you vote absentee or affidavit, it will allow you to track your ballot to make sure that you can tell whether or not it was counted and processed. So really good information on there. And just encourage people, again, to go and check, do their research before they go vote today. But that's a great tool. Again, it's called My Election Day, to give them all the information they need for elections here in Mississippi.
And some folks, such as myself, have 2 different precincts depending on the type of election being held. Explain that.
That's right. So sometimes you're going to have a municipal precinct that's going to be different from a county or state level precinct. So make sure that you check that. You can find that on My Election Day. Again, it will tell you where to go vote and all the tools that you're going to need, your ID, et cetera. But that's a very good point, Gerard, to make sure that people are aware where they actually do go vote on this, a federal election primary day. So there are some times too. So that's a great point that you made there. And I hope folks will educate themselves before they go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very useful, and we appreciate that for sure. So I voted this morning at my precinct, and I just wanted to share with you that, as is always the case, the poll workers couldn't have been nicer, more accommodating, more friendly, and just more appreciative, honestly, of just being there and exercising your right to vote.
Yes, Gerard, they're so good, and they are the unsung heroes of elections. We were very glad to get their pay raise pushed through the legislature. So not that they need money to do that, but again, it's a long day. And we appreciate all of those who come out and volunteer to do this. And again, every time I go to a precinct, I make sure to tell every single one of them, thank you for working. I hope all of our voters will do that. Again, it's so important to have them. If we don't have them, we're in trouble. So just make sure you tell them thanks. And again, I told mine this morning, thank you for what you do.
Yeah. And so, by the way, fast, efficient, easy, convenient, no big deal, in and out. That's the way it should be. Remind the voters in Mississippi the photo ID requirement, where one has to authenticate and prove their identity. What qualifies for that purpose?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We got a list of those IDs. I think there are roughly 10 of them, and you can find that at y'allvote.ms. And Jordan, it's so easy to me. I want to remind folks that a lot of people say, well, that's a suppression move. Well, no, it wasn't. If folks needed an ID, not only would we give you a free ID, but we'll give you a ride to the clerk's office. So Mississippi did everything they could to make sure people had access to that ID. And not only do you get the ID for voting purposes, you now have a government issued ID that you probably could use for other reasons. And again, free, that we give to you to make sure you have that for your voting purposes.
Yeah. So that's the law of the land here in Mississippi. And like you said, this is no effort to oppress or suppress. This is quite easy. And I didn't even know. We'll actually give them a ride to go take care of that.
So,
Unbelievable.
look, we pulled out all the stops at the very beginning to make sure people did not feel like it was an effort to suppress, that we would help in every way possible. And so I think it's important for Mississippians to know that.
Okay, so with respect to those who voted absentee, what are the rules around that in order for their vote? There's a deadline, right, that their ballot has to be received by their local office, and then we have so many days after that. Actually, be postmarked, right, by the end of Election Day. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. So absentee in person ended this past Saturday. But again, those who have requested a ballot by mail, as long as it's postmarked by today and received within 5 business days, then it will be accepted through the normal process. And obviously, we'll go through all the checks that we do with every other type of absentee or affidavit ballot as well.
Okay. So really no excuse for someone not casting a ballot who's qualified to do so. And if you're of age and you qualify, there's no excuse for not getting a photo ID so that you can take care of that requirement. I mean, we make it pretty easy for you, honestly.
It is as easy as ever to vote in Mississippi. And again, we've talked about this before, but you go back and look at 2020, we were smashing records for voter turnout with COVID in our face. And that's right here in Mississippi. So for anybody to say it's hard to vote in Mississippi, I flat out just don't believe them.
Yeah. Okay. So should any of the races, we've got some congressional races in primaries, and then, of course, we've got a U.S. Senate race as well. Certainly a possibility in Mississippi, in accordance with our laws, that those could advance to a runoff. When would that be held?
Yeah, so runoffs will be 3 weeks later. There's actually some legislation across the street right now dealing with that very topic, which may move them a week. But right now, what people need to know, again, is it's 3 weeks between the time of the primary and the runoff.
Okay. There's also, correct me if I'm wrong here, some legislation that would ban ranked choice voting. Is that right, in Mississippi? But I think that's been double referred over on the House side. I'm not really sure what to make of that, but do you have any particular thoughts about that? That does exist in some states and even at the municipal and county levels in some areas in the country.
It does. And if we remember, when we started talking about making sure that only United States citizens were voting in our country, I continue to use the example of school boards out in San Francisco who are allowing non-citizens to vote. Well, if you've seen the news, there was ranked choice voting out in California, and they came up with a wrong result. The winner actually had to sue to have the election overturned. That's how complicated and confusing it is for voters to have to go through this process. And we already see low turnout as it is. Imagine confusing a voter where you've got to explain to them exactly how they can vote to use that ballot. So many of them would be confused by that process. It's terrible. It's not a good thing. And so I'm really happy with Senator England and the Elections Committee bringing that out from the Senate and passing it over to the House. So we'll get to work over there. I did not know it was double referred, but I'll definitely take a look at that. And
check me out on that. For some reason, I think that's the case. Check me out on that just to make sure. But I think it's a good move. I don't think that is in the best interest of the voting public in Mississippi. In Mississippi, of course, we have so-called closed primaries. You want to explain that versus an open situation, which is, I believe, the approach used in Louisiana.
Right. So many people talk about the jungle primary in Louisiana. Ranked choice voting is very similar to that in the sense that everybody's on that same ballot. And that's one of the things that we hear in Mississippi called closed primaries. So if you're a Republican, you choose a Republican ballot, but we do not register by party in our state. So if somebody wanted to go vote today and they decided they want to vote in the Republican primary, that's exactly what they would do, would request that ballot. A lot of folks have talked about party registration and then making people register for parties. So you're really closed, for lack of a better term, primary.
Change it.
That's right. That's right. So that's what we have now. Again, the jungle primary is similar to the ranked choice voting, and everybody's on that same ballot. And if you look at ranked choice voting over the years, Gerard, it tends to support one party. And that's one of the issues that we have seen, why it's surfacing many times. Unfortunately, Democrats love democracy when they win. So they try to rig the system to make sure it leans to their direction.
Yeah, so explain the rules again real quickly about in Mississippi when you choose, because you're asked by the poll worker, you want a Republican or a Democrat ballot. You choose one, you vote in that primary. If there is a runoff, you've got to stay in that party, right? If you do not vote in the primary, you can vote in any party's runoff. Is that correct?
That is exactly right. If you participate in a certain primary today, you can only vote in that primary's runoff. You cannot switch and then vote in the other party's runoff. If you do
Gotcha.
not vote today, you're exactly right. You can come out and vote in the runoff later on, whichever one you choose.
Always good to see you, Mr. Secretary, and thanks to you and your office and all your team for making sure that elections in the state of Mississippi are secure and they're accurate and they're true. We appreciate it.
You got it anytime, buddy. Thank you.
We're coming right back, folks, in the Element Well studio. Please stay with us.